Yeah? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. It is my extreme, supreme pleasure to lead this panel today, this morning, with such amazing people who represent such incredible music cities from around the world. Just by brief introduction, from the farthest to my right, your left, we have Azucena Miko, who's the head of research, sound diplomacy in Barcelona. We have Beck Bates from the Music Development Office, representing Adelaide City of Music, UNESCO. Joey Hendrickson, how to build the Music City, Columbus, USA. And Jillian McDaniel, representing Kingston City of Music, UNESCO, Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. And today we have a really, what I think is a fascinating discussion about the music industry and how we have managed in our music cities to support it. And I wanted to start off with a question that I think is going to lay the foundation for a conversation, which is, in your city, how do you get to know the music industry? How do you map out where the gaps are? How do you measure what the needs of the music industry are? And therefore, how do you know what it even needs and what you need to support? Can you perhaps speak to these instruments that you use in your particular cities to help support the music industry? So Beck, maybe you would want to start?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. So I'm going to focus my talk specifically around artist development. So I have a background in artist management, and after that I then went and joined the state government, and we set up a music development office which does artist development and industry development. But for this question I'm just going to focus on artist development. So I think the first thing for me is about understanding your local industry, having a really good relationship, and in this particular talk, with artists in our industry, and understanding the context within which they sit, living in Adelaide within Australia, and what that means for them. That then enables us to create our programs and initiatives that are going to help them in their career by basing themselves in South Australia. So as a bit of background, as you'll see, so Adelaide is the capital of South Australia, where that doorway was, and we're a UNESCO City of Music, and that recognition isn't necessarily because we're not the biggest music city in Australia, nor necessarily the best, but that recognition comes as recognition of our rich cultural history, a rich musical history in South Australia and in Adelaide, and it comes in a recognition of how we place music at the core of our cultural identity. And I think that's important. Many really fabulous musicians have come from Adelaide, but they quite often have left because it's hard to develop a career from that city. So as a bit of context about the programs that I'm going to explain, we have most of the music industry is based on the east coast of Australia, so on the other side. So maybe one more slide. That didn't move. Oh, that's okay. On the other side of Australia, it's Melbourne and Sydney, big cities, epicentres of Australia. That's where most of the music industry is. And so in Adelaide, we have lots of small managers and labels and smaller companies there, but none that have the money within their commercial enterprise to invest in artist development. And so that's what I see as the opportunity for the government to come in with a program to help stimulate that section of our industry. So, and as I said before, we've had some great artists. You've probably heard of Sia Furler, she's from Adelaide, TK Meidzer, artists like that. We also have some really good recording studios, even though people use them less and less. And we also have good music producers in Adelaide. And if any of you know a music producer, many of them are very shy, so they're hard to uncover and to get them to build their own profiles. So that's sort of the context that we're working in. We run a recording grants program, and I was noticing that people were applying for money to go and record albums in Melbourne and Sydney. And I would say, well, why are you doing that? And they'd say, well, they've got better studios, they've got better producers. And I'd say, well, no, we've got them here in Adelaide, but they just didn't know about them. So there was a lot of a misunderstanding of even our local community about what was available to them there. And the final point I just wanted to give you context about the programs I'm going to talk about is that the publishing houses in the east coast of Australia quite often, part of what publishing houses and publishers in Australia do is they bring their artists together to collaborate, to produce new music, to put it to the market. We don't have that in South Australia either. So something that we did was build some songwriting rooms and run some programs there. So the programs that I am going to talk about, if we can go to the next slide, there's 3 that I've chosen. Oh, I did it in the wrong aspect. You can't read them. That's okay. One is the Robert Stigwood Fellowship Program. Another one is a producer series, and the third one is called the John Lemon Artist in Residence Program. So if we go to the next slide, that's fine. So the Robert Stigwood Artist, it's fellowship program. It's a 1-year fellowship. It's for musicians, but it's also for music industry people, inspiring music industry people. We have an international group of music professionals that choose out of the people that apply for this. So when the international people are choosing these people, they're choosing them for market potential in a global context. And so about 4 bands every year get chosen. We're in our 4th year. And they go through a 1-year mentoring exercise with one of Australia's best managers and one of our good A&R people there. And we back that with a fairly deep investment of money into their A&R. So we're in our 4th year of that, and it's had an amazing effect. One of our first artists is this year for our Australian Record Industry Association, our ARIA Awards. It's the biggest in the country. Has 2 nominations. It's working. I'm saying they're not leaving Adelaide. They're staying in Adelaide, building their careers from there. They've learnt how through this you can build your connections and work around the world without having to pick up and move your whole life. That for us is very important. It means that drain people, because Melbourne is very close to Adelaide, and I always joke that we've supplied Melbourne with most of their great musicians, but now we're going to keep them in Adelaide. But the ripple effect from this program specifically as well is that the profile of our local music industry has increased exponentially, because we've these artists that are going through there, they're doing viable tours now around the country. They're exporting their music, they're touring internationally, and they're getting press and media. And that press and media is other people then saying good things about our city. And so when, as you know, other people say good things about your city and your industry, people then take more notice. And so then the profile of our artists gets better and they feel more comfortable about their hometown. So that ripple effect is very, very powerful, I found, through that program. Another long-term goal of that program I was really hoping for is that, like I said, we're in our 4th year. So now what we'll start to do is get some of those alumni, the fellows, to come back and then start mentoring the people that are in that. So what that does is it builds that collegiance and that network and a really strong local community. And that's something I'm really hoping to see happen too. So the next program, if we go to the next slide, is called the Producer Series. And this is the one that I thought of because of the people going to Melbourne and Sydney to record. So we ran this initially for 1 year and then we haven't run it again this year, but that's not, it's just, we'll do it again at some point. But basically what we did is we have an expat South Australian producer who's quite famous. He's now in London. He's got a co-write on Adele's latest album, so he's doing okay now. But he's worked with many around the world, and I called to my local producers that I knew were doing really good things but that nobody knew about, and I asked them to apply to spend a day in the studio with Sam. So he chose 4 people and he worked with them, and he came to Adelaide and he worked in the studio. So the ripple effect of that for me is that that's raised their profile, their awareness, as well as that skills development. And in 1 minute I'll just quickly tell you about the next one. These slides aren't working. I did them in the... So these are the 2 rooms that we built in the absence of having publishing houses in South Australia. We built 2 rooms. They're not completely sound attenuated or fully kitted out studios. They're just songwriting rooms. They've got basic gear in there. We get artists to come in. We give the artists a grant. So as you know, many musicians, before they have a viable career, they're serving coffee, working the bar. So we give them money so they can not work a second job for the period of time that they're going to come into the studios and write, so they can still eat and pay their bills, but then they can just focus on writing. And one of the provisos, though, is that we only give them the money if they do something collaborative. So they have to collaborate with another artist or a producer or a sound engineer as well. So we set that up as that collaborative, to produce more collaborative work and that kind of thing. So they're the ones.
Thank you very much for that case study, Beck. I think what came out for me is that you're definitely working outreach, making sure that information is available about the opportunities that are in the city. You're battling talent drain from Adelaide to other major cities in the on the Australian continent. You're mentoring and looking for those partnerships that will help strengthen individual artists. But just going back to the question a little bit, how do your cities manage to map those needs out? How do you measure what exactly your community needs so that it stays in the city, so that it creates in the city, so that it develops itself in the city? Maybe Joey, could you say a few words about how you do that in Columbus?
Sure, I would love to. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. This is already shaping up to be one of the coolest events I've ever spoken at, and Katowice Music Summit Round 2 is really cool, so I can tell this is going to be an amazing conference. Don't let me talk your ear off, there's so much more information, but let's talk about Columbus, Ohio a little bit. So, I think we have a slide deck for this as well, but we are a city that is pre-music hub. So we don't have city government funded music hub just yet. Nevertheless, we've had so much impact, and it's been amazing to work with musicians in our city and start to get to know them and also find out exactly what their needs are. So we started from the ground up really and had 3 How to Build a Music City events. And these events united the music scene with business, government, and city. And we brought all of these people together in the same room to talk about the music scene and the needs of the music scene. So several hundred people attended, and I'm not sure if we have a slide for that, but we had about several hundred people attend 3 different events throughout our city, and we started to just get their ideas on the music scene in Columbus. So from these events, we took a survey of about 20 different questions and 20 different ideas that the music scene could start to upvote in our city, and they could start to talk about in our music scene collaboratively with our city government. So, excuse me. From these different questions, we developed a task force of 90 different representatives from the pockets of our music scene. And through this task force, we had, thank you so much, we had different programs, about 10 different programs that came out of this task force development. So imagine city, government, music, and business meeting together in the same room. It was kind of like the family coming home for Christmas. There was lots of conflict and lots of things to work out, but through this task force meeting, we were able to start to map up some of the early needs of our music scene. And so How to Build a Music City, bringing 500 musicians together into a task force of about 90 people and starting to talk about these ideas. We were able to get into the leaders that represented the different pockets of the scene and understand exactly what the needs were through the leaders. So that's one of the things that I recommend for any city that's starting out that doesn't have a music hub, is find yourself in a room with 300 or 400 musicians, start to get 20 of their ideas or have them vote up 20 different ideas, and then develop those ideas into a task force of leaders who can start to sort through those 20 different ideas from the music scene and come out with a really representative group of strategies. So our tourism department, with our arts council, with some of the people from our city government, with a CEO of a pizza company, a $200 million pizza company, alongside musicians, started to take some of the ideas from the music scene and say, okay, we know exactly what we have in front of us. Here's all the ideas from the music scene. Here's all the feedback from the musicians. And then based on these ideas, there's 20 of them, that's a lot to think about, but based on these ideas, let's develop a basic SWOT, like a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It sounds very maybe archaic, maybe basic, but pre-Music Hub, it's not a bad place to be in terms of representing your scene to collect those ideas from musicians and then to upvote those ideas through a task force that's representative from the music scene, and then develop the strategies around all that community input. And so what we found is, even by developing those initial strategies, we've been able to engage our music community so much, almost more, than other cities that we've seen that have top-down, maybe at times, government strategies. And so we've been able to engage our community in the work that needs to be done because we've used their ideas. So it's good to blend top-down and bottom-up, but we took a purely bottom-up approach, and so far we've seen the benefits have been very representative strategies, because all the strategies are based on the musicians' ideas, and then a public-private partnership between city and musicians and business that allows those strategies to actually be implemented in a way that is representative of the community. So we have like 100 volunteers now, which is crazy because we don't have any staff. But we have 100 volunteers. We were able to take that back to our city government. And then in the US, we don't have a lot of funding for, music. I think it's $8 million of music funding for the whole country, which is crazy because we have like a lot of people. And so it's really hard to find government money. Nevertheless, because we have this large volunteer force of about 100 volunteers, mixed with business, city, and nonprofit art support, the city was like, okay, we're gonna write you a check. And that's gonna come from state government funding. And I don't understand why more US cities haven't taken this approach, because it's really just, you throw some events and you bring some musicians out, you get their feedback. Once the events get populated and have hundreds of people coming out, you develop a task force that's representative of your music scene, and then you start voting up these ideas, then you go ask for money. For me, it's really been that simple in terms of understanding the needs. And so more music cities in the US could be doing this. So far, so good for us in terms of understanding the strategies that we have to do. And those strategies, if we have a deck, I'd love to show, but if not, those strategies so far have been putting on educational workshops for musicians, like maybe similar in Adelaide, and putting on recording opportunities for those musicians in studios in our arts district to advocate for music. And that led to a huge partnership to expand the sidewalks in one of our downtown districts and program music into those sidewalk expansion, which was kind of important for our arts culture in our city. And then also we've developed a heck of a lot of interest in music technology. So we're starting to bring entrepreneurs, which is a strength in our city, around our music space, and through the identified needs of the musicians, match up tech entrepreneurs with musicians. So we're starting to see a large growth in opportunity for music technology in Columbus, but also new technologies that could bless the tech scene while also helping and supporting the musicians. So people could be making money while helping people, which is always good.
I think those are really fascinating examples of how cooperation can actually get you much farther than some generic type of competition, which only builds boundaries between people. And the fact that you are connecting different types of people who can bring different elements and different ideas together is really a fascinating one. And I think talking more about how you structure those meetings, how you bring that community together would be of great benefit, I suppose. Beck, do you run something similar? Because it sounds like there are connections here between your cities in terms of approach. Do you have a community that you garnered the support of in your community?
Yeah, very much. So we have, we do it through face-to-face meetings. We have a hub. So it's not a beautiful old theatre like this beautiful hub. It's a church that we've converted into like a precinct, and it's called St. Paul's Creative Centre. And so I'm based there with two of my colleagues. We're the only 3 government people in the building. The rest is industry. And so we have a combination of music organisations and then broader creative industries organisations. So tech, we've got VR and web development and 360 and back-end coding, that kind of thing, in the same building, working together. And then we also have educational programs run through there through some training organisations. So we have students coming in there. So the students come in and then they see the businesses working. So through that and me and my 2 colleagues and I being based there, we have a day-to-day connection with industry. So some days, 20 people might come through, other day hundreds of people might come through for an event or something, and nobody's ever shy to come and tell us what they think or need or that kind of thing. But we also run, surveys and do lots of benchmark setting, censuses and those kind of things, economic reports. And so we do those more formal things as well, but it's always the face-to-face, the community. It's so important, definitely.
So I think I will ask Azucena now from Barcelona to perhaps speak to what the context is there. Have you noticed any particular movements going on in the city that have been really necessary in garnering support around the music industry?
Yeah, so just a quick presentation before. I work for Sound Diplomacy. We are not a government agency. We are a company that we develop strategies to help governments make the most of the music, understand the value of music, and apply it to their social and economic goals. So we work with cities and we work with regional and country governments. And I am based in Barcelona, and one of the cities we're working with is Barcelona, so I wanted to kind of quickly explain what's going on there, because it can answer your question, and it relates to both of what you were saying. So you can go to the next one. As you may already know, in Barcelona we have major festivals such as Sonar and Primavera Sound. Both of them bring in thousands of people to the city, and they also bring industry. They have their professional conferences as well. Then we have Cruïlla, which is a smaller one, but that brings a lot of people as well, and it was founded as a cultural exchange music festival and keeps being so, and it's very interesting. And then we have the public festival, which is La Mercè. It's like what we call Festa Major. It's the big fest in the city, so that all arts gather together, people go in the street. And I wanted to talk about this one. Can go to the next one. Within this festival, we have Barcelona Acció Musical, which basically means Barcelona Musical Action. And it's a festival for emerging artists that has 5 stages all around the city. So if you would see it in the map, it would go all over the city, which is a main thing for a music city, which is decentralization. It also has, since last year, a small event of workshops, talks, small conferences, and even music exhibitions. And they have started as well to do some connections between different musicians that come to play to the festival to do some experimentation. And within this BAM project that for the last 10 years it has been just a festival and that it's slowly developing, they have started to do what they call the expanded BAM, that if you can move forward. And this is where Sound Diplomacy comes in. They have moved kind of the project to an old factory that is called Fabra y Coats, and we were commissioned to develop a strategy for this factory, and we believe this is what is starting the music strategy for the city of Barcelona. Because even if it has all the festivals I was saying, all the pro conferences, and obviously much more than that, we have venues, we have big auditoriums, we have opera house, we have many things. There wasn't really a big support for artists and the music industry community, and there is no mapping at all. And what we believe, and we have realized throughout the years, is that any city can be a music city, but without a strategy and without evaluation, there is no music city at all. Because if musicians don't get the support they need, if governments don't know, as you were saying, what these musicians are requiring, what are their needs, what the city is lacking to help them, if the music industry doesn't have, I don't know, affordable spaces to work, as it would be, for instance, some poles, then there is not such a thing as a proper music city, so to say. And one of the things that we proposed, what we did in this study is we analyzed 14 music hubs all around the world, one of them being St. Paul's. And we came out, what I like to say, like the final music hub, which is now starting to develop. This strategy was written 1 year ago. And within this factory, we have co-working spaces, artistic residencies, so the things that you would see happening in a music hub. But we are also developing now, which will start next month, a music commission, as you were explaining, which will bring together first only the musicians that are in the music hub, which at this point are around musicians and music industry representatives, are around 50 people. Now the next step is for each of them to bring one person from outside the hub, from the city of Barcelona, and kind of expand the commission this way, so that at the end it includes all the ecosystem of the music in Barcelona to analyze, gather all the ideas and understand what the city really needs and develop a city strategy out of that. And one of the things that we are lacking, that you were asking, is actually the evaluation and the measurement. And within this strategy, we develop the first steps to evaluate how it is working and how the music, the city moves forward in terms of their music strategy.
So I wonder, in such a big city as Barcelona, have you noticed any one small change that you've managed to make throughout this year that has really capitalized and produced great results as a result?
I have to say, if I can think of something like more recent, obviously the development of Sonar and Primavera Sound 20 years ago, it's a major change, but it came with a lot of changes within the city, which was like the Olympic Games and many other things that were happening around the city. But in the shorter term, so to say, in the last 2 years, as some of the major cities in the world, we have been experiencing music venues closing. And there was this one very, very iconic music venue that had to close 1 year ago, no, 1 year and a half ago, I think. And kind of that was the sport that made everyone understand the value of a single place within the whole music ecosystem. And in a way, I kind of believe this has made many of the things that are happening now, like expanding this citywide festival throughout the year, wanting to focus more this creative space into music. Because actually, the venue that was closed, the people that run it are going to be based here now, and they're going to make their events here now. So from something bad, I think many good things have happened. Sometimes it's sad that this needs to happen from bad things, but at the end, if the results are helpful for the community, obviously that's, in my opinion, it's great.
I really like this sort of connecting thread that is developing, that relationships are really at the core of supporting the music industry. So we can talk a lot about the lack of money or infrastructure or resources in that way, but if we don't have those partnerships that are developing across boundaries, whether they be a particular area, so tech and music, if we don't have those things connecting people to one another, then we don't really have a music industry. And I wonder how that relates to your example, Jillian, because we've been talking a little bit about the public-private connections, and I know that in your city you have a really great example of how that can work in your case study.
Okay. Thanks, JJ. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm from Kingston, Jamaica. And just by way of context, I want to talk about Kingston as a music city. Jamaica has a population of around 2.7 million persons. Kingston has about 600,000 of those. And the music scene in Jamaica has grown fairly organically, I'd say. So it's interesting, your comment that without a strategy and an evaluation process that you don't have a music city at all. Because from a Kingston perspective, I know all the musicians and artists in Kingston would say that they have grown without government, despite government, and in spite of government and government support. Kingston's music, the 6 genres of music, mento, ska, rocksteady, dub, reggae, dancehall, have grown. despite the lack of government support over the years. And I am here from the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, representing Kingston as a music city, so that's also a very interesting thing. But when we think about music in Jamaica, the support networks that you're talking about have happened by way of those public-private partnerships. It has been because musicians themselves have gone out and you have had private enterprise and non-profit organizations that have supported the music industry. Trenchtown as an iconic music space, Alpha Institute that has been in Jamaica since 1865 that have actually had interventions in relation to at-risk youth and at-risk boys. So persons like Don Drummond, that famous trumpeter, came out of the Alpha Institute. And then we have organic music spaces like Eastwood Park that have production facilities that are clustered in particular areas. So the support network for Kingston and government, we are now catching on to what the musicians and our artists have always known, that they have to come together, they have to cluster together as individuals, as creative people, in order to build something that is so integral to their own lives, because it is music that has developed the culture and the history of Jamaica. So when persons think of Jamaica, they think sport as well, but we also think even more foundationally of the Bob Marleys, of the Peter Tosh, of the Dennis Browns, and we think music. My program that I wanted to highlight was something called the Masters in Residence program that is actually a USAID and an educational institution funded program that kind of piggybacks on what sport has done in relation to having iconic or good structures for new and emerging talent. What is interesting about the Masters in Residence program too is that it actually focuses on women in music. I'm sure not many of you can think of an iconic female Jamaican singer, but you can think of a lot of males. And so that particular deficit is something that that Masters in Residence program actually looks at. How do we involve women more in the music industry? They sing, they're sound engineers, they're technicians, but do we really have a structured program? What are the challenges that women face in the music industry? And so that Masters in Residence program actually has one component where women are mentored throughout the process. Mentored by, interestingly enough, and it's a good thing, mentored by men in the business who are able to kind of work them and walk them through some of the challenges that may exist as women. There is the issue of songwriting and lyrics that are inclusive, having a more inclusive lexicon in terms of how we treat and how we treat with various issues as Jamaican music and as Jamaican artists and musicians. So I'm not sure if you wanted to.
Yeah, Jillian, I think that brings up a really pivotal point in the conversation. How do you ensure access to support in the music industry? You were speaking about the example of making sure that there are specific programs dedicated to women. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if across the other cities there are perhaps examples of such dedicated programs.
For mentoring, you mean?
Well, for anything, whether it be a music residency program specifically dedicated to female artists, or
we've got something called Girls to the Front, and we fund a private organisation called Music SA. It's like our peak body for music in South Australia, and we fund them to do something called Girls to the Front. So they get some sort of rock girls, girls with big guitars, and they come in and work with high school age girls And you know, a lot of things that are uncovered. There's been a lot of press about it in Australia about women in the music industry and challenges, and there's a myriad of reasons. But one of the probably the more simplistic possibly reasons was just confidence. And so having these sort of powerful rock girls, musicians, young women, empowering school-age girls, I think is quite powerful. They see her, you know, this one girl working in LA and then coming back and saying, you can do this. And I think that's quite powerful, yeah.
And Dewey, you have a group of about 100 artists that come together as part of this task force commission.
Right, this Masters in Residence program that you're talking about, absolutely. But the truth is that there are other industry associations that have formed, the Jamaica Reggae Industry Association, the Music Society, and so on. So we do have other types of interventions within the music industry. In fact, the European Union funded through their private sector development program was a catalyst for the development of the Jamaica Reggae Industry Association. So that was. I mean, it's kind of interesting that we have had all this international support in relation to structuring the music industry. When we think about strategies and mapping, because that's also one of the questions that you asked, we have started working with Bogota, Colombia, in relation to the creation of a creative industry satellite accounting system, so that we can truly start mapping the value of the creative industries. Because one of the things about government is that if you don't show me the money, if you don't say the music is worth X amount of money, 100 million euros, then you don't get the kind of support that is necessary in terms of infrastructure and in terms of truly developing the industry. And so we have decided to be more data-centric, because culture sometimes can be, we can talk in very existential terms when we say, culture is valuable as just because it is culture and it changes lives. But the question always from the economists is, but how much money do you make? And so we have had to kind of start to take that approach to make sure that the sector, the music sector, develops in the same way that tourism, for example, develops in Jamaica.
So as sound diplomacy, can you speak to this case a little bit?
Yeah, it was, as she was speaking, connecting everything a bit, there is in Spain now this association that is called Women in the Music Industry, and it's kind of just women-based, and it doesn't have any support from the government at all. And they are doing a great job because for instance, they are doing prize, like an award. Yeah. It's prize, no? Mm-hmm. Sorry. For festivals that have more female, whatever, musicians, singers, technicians in the festival. They're also doing studies to raise our kind of map and evaluate how their work is making the position of women in the music industry grow and improve. And that's what she was saying about always needing to prove in terms of money what the music does. I personally think that's one of the main problems of culture. It always has to self.
Yeah.
I cannot think of the word in English now. I'm sorry, but it's like, we are doing this. We are making this money for this city. We are making this money for these industries. When we all know that music and cultural has a value for itself, and it has a value that goes beyond, way beyond the money that it can make. It can be youth retention, it can be women development, it can be just cultural exchange and diversity and respect. And I think one of the main problems is that we always map the money and we never map the social impact of it. And I think this is not the new, but it's kind of starting to be a trend to try and understand what are the other values of music and of creative industries.
Can I add something to that? We did one of the many, justifications of value of culture. And it was a survey of music venues, and they were trying to evaluate the economic return that live music brings to the state and all of that kind of thing. But the last question on the survey was to all of these venues was, what for you is the key, the golden key to knowing you've had a good night? And all of them said the vibe. Mm-hmm. How do you put a money value on the vibe? And that. But we all know that that's what it's all about. And and there are ways you can break that down and say, well, without all of this, you don't get that vibe. But that vibe is worth everything. There's not a dollar figure for that.
Our economic development department did a study in Columbus on our pulse, and they found out that Columbus had no pulse, which was a great reason to ask for money for music, because as the arts are growing and as the city's growing, it's so important to have pulse, that vibe. Otherwise, people will get to a city and work really hard and go to do something and find that they aren't enjoying life as much as they could otherwise if there was pulse. So how do you measure that enjoyment? I think for those cities that haven't even invested in music yet, you might already find studies of people trying to understand the vibe. And a good way to raise money for music is to reference those studies and say, well, here's part of the problem. You haven't invested in music yet.
I think that it's interesting to hear your different perspectives, because your different cities are coming at the issue from sort of different sides. Some cities are approaching it from a more grassroots perspective, where things happen naturally, organically. In other cities, things are steered a little bit more. So perhaps Barcelona is a good example. I just wanted to end with one final question, because we're at an international conference and we work all internationally. How do you see, what perspective and what potential do you see in international cooperation for helping you to fill those gaps that you've identified? And how do you support your music industry through your international cooperation?
Well, I know that for Kingston, for Jamaica, I've already spoken in relation to the EU support, USAID, and then even within the Creative City Network, having linking with cities that are fairly close to us geographically, because sometimes it gets a little bit difficult for us to travel long distances. But just linking with creative cities that are close to us and working on collaborative programs and truly partnering. So I think that internationally we can grow together, and the technology even allows us, even for those cities that are far away from us, the technology now allows us to actually have interventions in our city, and that will help the creators of the music as well as to help us to develop various programs across the network.
I think just the fact that you said we all come from this from a different perspective is almost, for me, the key. Is because we're all coming from a different perspective. Then when we all work together, you have like a full figure, And I think that's the beautiful end game, And I think that we send musicians to export and to tour and to do all those things, and that's a sort of a one-way thing, audience development and that, I think, which is great. But it's the understanding, the conversations, the relationships, and the collaborations that I think really strengthen that international. They're mobilising musicians on a global scale. I think.
And I think for Columbus, we are, we have a bit of a cultural problem in the U.S. with our current. We won't go into a political discussion right now, but with the U.S. pulling out of UNESCO, which was announced. And other things, we have a cultural problem, and I'm seeing that the problem is not going to be solved by government, and it's not going to be solved by nonprofit arts. It's probably going to be solved, in Columbus at least, by technology. So creating a tool or a series of tools that can be used to help us have better global relations, and also to maybe import artists into the U.S. that don't currently exist. What revenue streams do you use to input that music from around the world? What do you focus on when developing that technology? All those questions we're asking in Columbus as we're thinking about how could Columbus be not only recognized globally, but growing in our arts by learning from other people who have developed their arts, And it's not going to happen from our current administration. So it's about getting smarter, I think, to make those relations happen.
Yeah, I think what we always say to all the cities we work with, which are all over the place, is you don't really need to invent the wheel. There's many things all over the place that are many cities all over the place that are trying to solve the same problems as you are. You just need to see how they do it and see how it can work in your city. Maybe it doesn't work, but maybe it does, and you can find a way to implement it and it will work. And I think the other main thing is, as you said, to focus on other sectors and to see not only how other sectors work and how you can kind of replicate what they do, but also to see how you can collaborate with those sectors. And I think this is something, when I was speaking to David Grice about Sample's center, he was saying, like, we don't only have music industry companies and musicians, we have companies from all the creative sectors, and what we have achieved is that when a music company needs a designer, it doesn't go to Melbourne to find it. It will probably find it here, because now we're giving them kind of the resources to find themselves quicker and easier. And I think, obviously, as we were saying from the beginning, collaborations are the main thing. And sister alliances as well, as you were saying with Bogota, I find that super interesting.
Well, thanks so much for presenting your case studies and answering these questions. I'm wondering if we have any more from the audience for our panelists.
I was interested, I can't remember which speaker it was who said that in some ways providing the use of recording studios isn't as much as it was, and I think that's perhaps because a lot of musicians now have access to technology where they can create stuff in their own home or locally. And I wondered, just thinking about the impact of technology, what you think your roles are going to be looking forward in terms of kind of how technology will develop. You know, that may mean that some artists don't need that physical resource as much as they used to, but need other things.
We live in an internet world right now, and no matter your geographic location in the world, you can be connected in the same country called the internet. And so I think utilizing the internet as a tool for connecting artists is so key. And I think maybe even leveraging existing platforms that currently exist on the internet for use by your city might make sense in terms of helping artists to connect, collaborate, and create new works that are valuable for the industry, but also for your city. So how can we copy and paste or emulate some of those platforms that already exist and almost Columbusify or make them for Kingston, or, you know, how does the government get smart in using those existing technologies that currently aren't maybe satisfying the market demands, but could certainly satisfy the cultural demands of a city? I think those are certainly questions to ask and raise, and also involve musicians in as you're developing them. In terms of the issue of recording studios not being used, I think that's just an example maybe of perhaps the larger changes in the industry that have impacted not only the audio engineers but also the musicians and everybody in between when creating value for an audience. How do you get your city more interested in and listening to your city's music might be a solution, and it might be a controllable problem as opposed to looking at the global market and trying to solve this massive puzzle that companies often try to solve. Instead, how do we create local ecosystems where people from Columbus are hungry for Columbus musicians, people from Kingston are hungry for Kingston musicians, and then kind of programming and aligning to those consumer demands. So I think the local experience is on the rise personally, because I think it's a controllable problem. But I think cities need to get smart about how they use technology to satisfy those demands.
Any other questions from the audience? In that case, I thank you very much.
Thank you.